Okay, great.
Here we go. So good afternoon. I'm Paul Markle, Executive Director of the Barrie Chamber of Commerce. I'd like to thank you for joining our today for our discussion on the 2021 Ontario budget and your business. But before we start, I'm going to hand it over to our President, Todd Tuckey, to give a quick chamber update. And then it'll be back to me and we'll get going.
Great, thank you, Paul. Morning, everybody. So after an unprecedented year of increased government supports and economic uncertainty, the provincial budget must address needs that have become significantly higher priority through the pandemic. In addition to considering economic sustainability and recovery, the budget must also address the growing disparities felt by various groups and communities that were further highlighted by the COVID-19 crisis. The Barrie Chamber has been working with several other chambers in the province on a responsible business protocol that we believe will help the private sector's economic recovery through a consistent and measured approach to safe and equitable opening. Retaining strength in the private sector is in this way to help the provincial economy recover as a whole. Discussions like this are obviously a critical part of communicating with our local elected officials, ensuring that they are able to represent our community's needs in regional, provincial, and national discussions. Your government wants to hear from you and is still actively seeking your input so that they can work towards addressing the issues faced by various sectors and communities. We're so glad that you joined us today to hear from our local MPPs and the Ontario Chamber of Commerce about how the budget will impact your business, our region, and the province as a whole over the coming year. Back to you, Paul.
Thanks, Todd. So I'm going to introduce our panelists in just a moment and ask them to provide a brief update for you on the budget highlights. After which we're going to go to directly to the Q&A. You can find the question and answer at the bottom of your Zoom platform. Today we're going to try to focus our questions on the budget. So any non-budget related questions should be directed directly to the MPP offices by email or for response. And we will put those email addresses in the chat so you can pick them up easily. To submit a question, please choose the submit question to moderator option within your Zoom platform and type out your questions, and I'll read through them as we get going. So joining us this morning is Attorney General Doug Downey, MPP, Barrie, Springwater, Oro-Medonte. Morning, Doug.
Morning.
We also have with us Andrea Khanjin, MPP, Barrie, Innisfil. And today joining us for the first time is Claudia Dessanti from the Ontario Chamber of Commerce, who has had a lot to do with developing the responses to the budget and can provide some extra opinion because Todd and I are we're experts at things, but not always budget related. So we're looking for some help. So with that, I guess we'll start with Doug Downey and give us a couple of minutes of an update, and then we'll get going with the rest. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Paul, and thanks to the Chamber again for helping us connect with people in our community, our constituents, and you know, people that are keenly interested in politics, what's happening, and sometimes what's not happening. And welcome, Claudia. We really appreciate the work that we're doing, especially under the leadership of Rocco and the Ontario Chamber of Commerce. It's a really important resource for us, not just locally with local chambers, but when we go to do things like alcohol reform or anything province-wide, we always turn to the Ontario Chamber for the perspective. So it's a really important piece for us. So I'm really glad you're here. And the Minister Bethlen Falvey, he's the Minister of Finance and President of the Treasury Board. I'll say his name again, Bethlen Falvey, a name you may or may not have heard much before this year, but I'll tell you, he is probably the smartest guy I've ever met in government. He really understands the markets. He really understands numbers and finances. Really impressive individual. He brought forward our budget just recently, which is the reason we're here. And the theme is protecting people's health and our economy. That really, when you dig down into this, that everything touches back to either health or the economy. And it's everything from innovative tourism engagement to help support the tourism sector. We know that they've been affected greatly. Of course, there are small business pieces that I'm sure we'll get Q&As on that. But we've also taken some good ideas that came under Minister Fedeli and we expanded them. So things like childcare credits. Those are really important because it puts the parents back in control of childcare spending. It's not just institutional care investments, because areas in my riding like Elmville don't have institutional So your parents would otherwise be left out. So we've taken that and we've expanded that part. We've made significant investments in health infrastructure, in terms of what they call the HR, the health human resources. So that's people. There's lots in here on training. There's lots in here on direct business investments so that we can help people weather the storm. But there's also some really neat little pieces that are more granular. Free access to provincial parks during most of the week once we're able to get out and about. There's some really good practical parts. So I'll just stop there. I'm looking forward to the questions. There is so much in here. A lot of spending, I have to tell you, a little not intuitive for a conservative to spend as much as we're spending. But the reason that you save money in good days is so that you can spend it when you need to. And so we're sparing no expense in terms of health and trying to help people weather through this storm. So looking forward to the questions.
Sorry, my space bar wasn't working. On to you, Andrea. Thanks very much, Doug.
All right, thank you. And just to build on what Minister Downey was saying is, we understand everyone's exhausted with this pandemic. It's been a long time. It's exhausting. Everyone's made sacrifices. Doesn't matter what sector of the economy you're in. It's definitely been a different year than others. And I get it. The government gets it, and we are sympathetic to trying to do what we can. But as Doug mentioned, with what the minister's trying to do is, without healthy people, you can't have a healthy economy. And so we're trying to get out of this pandemic as quickly as we can. But if we go, too quick and we open up too many things, then we're regressing, right? And so I just wanted to note that, we are understanding of the exhaustion that's out there. But that's why this particular budget is so important. Minister Downey talked about, the spending in this budget. And so when people say spending, they often say, and I know small business communities say it all the time, is, well, where's the money going to come from? Am I going to get taxed later? And let's remember that the last, few budgets, how many taxes we did eliminate. In the first year of this particular government, we eliminated over $3 billion in tax increases. In addition to that, $150 million in scheduled fee increases. And so, that shows you that there's, this particular government, there's really no room for us to necessarily increase taxation. So in this budget, for those who like the fiscal fine print, you won't see tax increases, you won't see fee increases. The way that the projections here are going is we are really pivoting to growing the economy. And if Ontario grows in the economy, then fiscally the province does better. Therefore, your government, your taxpayer dollars you give to the government gets better. So that's what this budget really comes down to. So when people say, well, $10 million for the digital Main Street program, you're adding to that. Where's that coming from? Again, that's part of the growth strategy for the province. And so that's so important. And that's why, like, the investments that, Minister Downey was alluding to with training, we're going to be in this budget, there's a training tax credit, which is really great. It builds on all the things we're trying to do with skills trades and support the chamber with that. And I know the chamber is really keen on that aspect of things as well. But what the training tax credit allows you to do is write off 50% of your training expenses up to $2,000. That could be anything from post-secondary education, whether you're getting a diploma or certificate, but it could be anything in the so heavy machinery. Or if you're trying to pivot and you want to be a caretaker and be a PSW, the government will support you in that training, because we recognize a lot of what's happened in COVID is everyone's had to pivot. They've had to pivot how they do their business, whether it's going more digital using digital Main Street, or it's skilling up their skills. And we want to be supportive of that as much as possible. So that builds on a lot of that skills trade stuff that we're doing. But you'll see a lot of that. I do want to leave lots of time for questions. But the last thing I did want to mention is for those individuals that we know that the pandemic has had a big effect on families too, especially those with children and little ones. And so especially in schools. And as we see with what's happening in Peel and Toronto, I was messaging Dr. Garner yesterday and saying, like, can please keep our schools open? And he said that he's quite in favor of keeping schools open. But the Supports for Learners program that this government has done 3 rounds of, where we give it $200 directly to families to support you with things like laptops, et cetera. We're increasing that to $400 in this budget. So that's to understand that, there are expenses that, you have to endure when you're staying at home with your children. And we recognize that. And that indirectly helps a lot of our employers. And I know it frees up a lot of those people that have to make the sacrifices to stay at home. So on that note, I will pivot back to questions. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Andrea. I appreciate that. We don't have a lot of questions in there. So before I pass this off to Claudia, if you do have questions, please get them into the Q&A. With a smaller panel today, I think we're going to wind up getting into a much quicker discussion than we normally would. And it looks like Todd may have dropped off. He's in Midhurst. Perhaps we can bring up the broadband issue at some point to address his concerns out in that area. But with further ado, Claudia, let's get an update from the OCC.
Thank you, Paul. I'll just start by echoing what the MPPs said in terms of how difficult, frustrating, and heartbreaking the year has been for businesses. And we've tried our best as chambers to support businesses and inform government, but the pandemic is unprecedented. And so it hasn't been perfect and it hasn't been always fair. But I do want to thank the MPPs for always listening to us and working with us to adapt as the crisis evolved. I also want to give a shout out to the Barrie Chamber because they've been just fantastic in our relationship with them. And I know they worked closely with the government as well. So leading up to this budget, our chamber was really encouraging the government to focus on supporting the hardest hit sectors and communities. We know it's been a bit of an uneven experience for different groups, while also laying the groundwork for a strong and inclusive rebound. So overall, we feel that this is largely what we got with the budget. And I'm happy to share some of our highlights in a moment. But the upshot is that there's additional relief for small businesses, the tourism sector, parents, and investments in those things that will support a stronger recovery. So broadband is one, skills training is another. And we feel that this is really in addition to all of the healthcare investments, which will mitigate some of the losses. This will put us on a better footing for a quicker recovery. So this does come with a price tag, of course. Spending this year is an estimated $173 billion. That's a deficit of $33 billion. So in the long term, we need a plan to bring down the debt to GDP ratio. But what's really important right now is making smart and focused investments that will help people and businesses get through the immediate crisis. So what did we like? First, for small businesses, the budget provides a second round of payments through the Ontario Small Business Support Grant. And this is being done through an automatic top-up, which is really important to minimize the red tape involved. So eligible businesses are now receiving between $20,000 to $40,000. We like this program because it's flexible. Funding can be used to cover anything from wages, inventory, marketing, whatever makes most sense for your business. And applications are due today at midnight. I think it's been extended for a week. So that's good news if you are interested in applying. Also for small businesses, we mentioned Digital Main Street, and this was expanded. It's a great program. It helps businesses strengthen their online presence through grants, training programs, and advisory services. And I think that the key here is that the customer behavior is shifting towards more digital interaction long term. So this is going to set small businesses up for a strong path, both during the crisis, but also beyond. Next, tourism. We know that the tourism industry was among the first to be hit and will be among the last to recover. And for many local communities, tourism is their livelihood. So we've really encouraged focused spending to support tourism, So the latest budget has 2 new programs, both costing about $100 million. The Tourism and Hospitality Small Business Support Grant, one-time payments between $10,000 and $20,000 for small businesses that have experienced a revenue decline. So that could include hotels, travel agencies, amusement parks, camps. And this program fills a gap that we identified with the Ontario Small Business Support Program that was not, a lot of small businesses in the tourism sector were not eligible for that one. So this is really key. There's also a tourism recovery program, and this one will help businesses in the sector that have historically been successful to pivot to finance their restructuring, safe reopening, marketing, partnership development, all to set us up on a better path for post-pandemic strong tourism industry. We know that it's the life and blood of many regions. Other sector-specific supports we saw for the beverage alcohol industry, which was also heavily impacted by the pandemic, especially wineries and cideries that rely on tourism. So the budget extends funding for the VQA wine support program and the small cidery and small distillery support program, both of which our members find very helpful. The agri-food sector as well, the budget extends the agri-food workplace protection program that helps small businesses, small farms, implement health and safety measures to control the spread of COVID-19. My colleague is working on a report about the food supply industry that's being released next Monday. So we've got a ton of other recommendations that after the immediate crisis will help make our food supply system more resilient for future crises. Another priority area that was mentioned is, the skills training and employment support. There is $600 million for the next 2 years in the budget, which we were very pleased to see because it'll be critical to help workers get back on their feet in the short term, and also help upskill workers. We know that there's been a growing skills gap in Ontario for some time. RBC is predicting that about 500,000 jobs won't return post-pandemic in Canada, and a lot of those are in sectors like tourism. So we need to be thinking about what happens to those workers. And of course, the key announcement here is the Ontario Jobs Training Tax Credit. And if this passes, when it passes, it would be structured as a refundable personal income tax credit. So it provides up to $2,000 in relief for training costs. That is the most efficient way to do it, in our opinion. There was also investment in Employment Ontario, focusing on creating more digital services, all of which will help underemployed and unemployed Ontarians. And this is, of course, building on a bunch of other initiatives that were announced prior to the budget around skills, skill trade strategy, the skills development fund. So this is building on more work that's been done. Childcare support, again, Andrea mentioned this. I think it's really important to recognize that parents have suffered the most job losses, the most productivity losses, but also the most severe mental health impacts. And all of the data supports this because they've had to balance family care and paid work. So the government is proposing a top up to the care tax credit for this year and a third round of payments for the COVID child benefit, which will double payments to eligible recipients. There's also funding to support, women. We know women have been disproportionately impacted, something that the Chamber has really called attention to. So there's funding for survivors of domestic violence and a task force that is being formed on inclusive economic growth. Those things will help with a more inclusive recovery as well. So for regions outside the GTA, this is another piece that our data suggests that different regions have been growing at extremely different rates. So we need to make sure that as we think about recovery, no region is left behind. So broadband investments, just on cue, Todd is back with his good broadband. So there's additional $2.8 billion invested, which brings the total to $4 billion over 6 years. And the target is now to ensure that every region has access to reliable broadband by 2025. I just can't overstate how important broadband is. It's not a luxury at all. And this is in addition to Bill 257 that I just want to mention quickly, which will make it easier for telecoms to attach their wires to hydro poles. The devil is in the detail. So we're really looking forward to working with the government on rolling out these investments and these legislative improvements, because we need to make sure that we're moving forward on the broadband file as quickly as possible. The budget also enhances the regional opportunities investment tax credit. So this is being doubled from 10% to 20%. And this is a refundable tax credit that is available to corporations that build, renovate, or purchase certain buildings in regions of the province that have fallen behind. Barrie doesn't qualify, but other regions around here do. So if you have a business there, it's worth looking into. And then there's a bunch of other things that, you know, I could spend hours talking about. It's a very big and robust budget. It's generous in the right places, I like to say. If I were to say what was missing that maybe we would have liked to see, interprovincial trade, we think is a key opportunity in the post-pandemic era. There are lots of costly barriers to small businesses that want to sell their goods and services to other provinces or access talent from other provinces. There's barriers to labor mobility. So, you know, the government did spearhead the True North Free Trade Forum, and that's a platform to address this. But we really want to see some bold action, whether that's unilateral or bilateral declarations of harmonizing certain regulations where they're similar. That's going to go a long way in helping to open up markets and support economic growth. Again, on the regulatory front, we wanted to see some specific changes. For example, cannabis retailers have been allowed to engage in e-commerce during lockdown, but we think this should be made permanent to support the sector's growth, which has a lot of potential for job creation and provincial recovery. A few other things on our wish list, more support for local governments. We're about to release a report on the fiscal sustainability of municipalities. And this is very important to a lot of our chambers across the province. We know local governments have been hit hard on both sides of their balance sheets. So we have some recommendations in our report around property tax reforms, heads and beds levy, a bunch of other measures that we think could make local governments in a better position to invest in the services and infrastructure that support businesses. So those are some of the key takeaways from us. Really looking forward to any questions. Overall, good budget and lots of good news for businesses.
Thank you very much, Claudia. It was very detailed, and the budget itself was massive, 232 pages. When you start going through it, I mean, there's a lot of commentary in there as well that sort of supports the decision-making things. Yesterday, or in Barrie, Claudia, you may not be aware of this, but there's a thing called the RISE Summit, which is a research and innovation summit at Georgian College. It's you know, student involved and just discusses a number of things. But the keynote speaker was the chief economist for the BDC, and it was interesting yesterday. You know, him mentioning that there are actually 30,000 more jobs in manufacturing now than there were pre-pandemic. And if you look in our area, as it relates to housing, you know, our pricing is very much in line almost with Toronto at this point. And we have a lot of you know, unfilled manufacturing jobs. So that housing, manufacturing, and that, you know, I guess the supports back to municipalities for affordable housing is becoming critical to being able to have our manufacturers actually recover quicker. But his response was actually really interesting because, you know, it puts us ahead of Canada, the US in terms of economic recovery. So we're on the right foot, and I think that interprovincial trade piece is very important to continuing that, and now is the right time to be sort of talking about those things. So all in all, I think it was a pretty good budget. But clearly it's not going to tick all the boxes. So I'm going to take a couple of questions, and we like to do this more conversational, so anybody can jump in. I'm not going to be looking for hands. If you've got a comment on mic, and we'll go that route, and I'll try to move them around. There's not a ton in here, so, you know, feel free to expand and stretch a little. But we'll go from there. So one of the questions is with regards to the skills training. Will the skills training apply to self-employment training as well? Vantage is a 17-year-old entrepreneurial training business that is pivoting to online early in May. Can those who want to learn how to be an entrepreneur qualify?
I don't know specifically if it'll affect Vantage, but we have put out OSAP microloans to allow people to pick up sort of smaller chunks of education. So we could look at that, whether that would apply for some people. I think that question came from Patricia.
Yeah.
So we can connect with her and sort of work through the mechanics of that to see if it works. The other part of that is in terms of the flowing of apprenticeship and retraining. Minister McNaughton's looking for every avenue to engage, because we know the need is just gargantuan. We just need to find pathways for people. So on that very specific one, we're going to have to connect and work through. But I know Georgian College is definitely on the right side of all of these initiatives as well. But we'll have to loop back with Patricia on that.
Yeah, they have many, there's a lot of micro credentialing, upskilling, programs that are already up and live. And there's obviously more of that stuff coming its way. So I would imagine those courses have a cost with them if they would be eligible then in a lot of cases, which is great.
Yeah, and as long as they're from just to build on that, from a post-secondary institution, right? If it's recognized, then, that's 50% you can write off. And another thing to look into with Patricia is when you're doing your taxes or your accountant, the way that this is based off is it's based off your Canadian training credit limit for 2021. And that's on your last notice of assessment. So if you have that on your last notice of assessment, then you'd qualify. So you'd have to look into that, because that's what they're basing this one off of, is that notice of assessment.
Which Claudia was mentioning was the easiest way of actually applying the credit, which is good.
Yeah.
Perfect. Is there any plan to subsidize daycares through the CEWS or other programs? It's been identified that childcare is critical to economic recovery, but the current staffing requirements and capacity restrictions mean that daycare funding model is upside down, and without funding, many of them won't be able to continue operations. Passing on cost to parents in the midst of a pandemic could lead to more women dropping out of the workforce.
Yeah, so we increased the childcare, it's called CARE, the childcare tax credit and that covers everything from somebody babysitting, the cost of babysitting, to camps, to a variety of things once they're operational again. So we've increased that. It leaves money back in the parents' pockets. It also allows them to decide what kind of care they want. And I briefly mentioned that on the front end, but in terms of subsidizing the individual daycare operations, because I think that was part of the question, there's certainly the PPE enhancements, depending on whether they're profit, nonprofit, whether they qualify for the small business grant piece. So again, depends on the individual a little bit, but there are some parts there. I mean, some of the things that we've done across the board, property tax rebates, energy costs has been adjusted through. So there are a number of those input costs that we've tried to address that help everybody.
Yeah.
I could jump in as well. The federal budget is coming out in a couple of weeks, and we're expecting some investments in childcare there. I think a lot of the provincial focus is on supporting parents, and that's very important so that they have choice and they can spend that money where it makes sense. But we do need investments in the supply side as well. So we're hoping to see some federal transfers around that in the upcoming budget.
Yeah, and just to build off of what Claudine said, is part of our budgets also, working with the federal government, and we've really advocated a lot for them to lean in a little bit more in supporting families. As you know, the federal government, they have more oversight with the Bank of Canada. They can print more capital. Provincially, we can't. We just borrow, and at some point, there's only so much you can borrow. So in terms of a childcare subsidies, the 75% of the childcare expenses was the kind of the largest thing we could have done in the last budget. And this one is, as Minister Downey mentioned, it's a 20% top up. So what that means on average is you're going to get, instead of getting about $1,250, you're going to get $1,500. And that's obviously a sliding scale based on your income. But through COVID, one thing we've recognized is a lot of people's income has decreased. And so when you do apply for that, a lot more people are going to be able to get a larger return on their child tax credit than they did previously. And to note, when you are doing your taxes, it's not just applicable to institutional childcare. Like Minister Downey was saying, if you were able to get a very limited spot in our coveted dance studios, which my heart goes out to that industry right now. But if you were able to get that 10 spot limit, that's included in your childcare tax credit. If you went, cross-country skiing, while that was open over Christmas holiday, that can be included. So that's extra capital parents are getting, which means they can invest that back into whether it's a childcare spot. So we recognize that. And so what the other thing we've invested heavily in is we committed to about 30,000 childcare spaces, and about 10,000 of those are going to be in schools. And as of winter 2021, we're just over 20,000 spaces. So that's something we're able to do, but we are advocating with the federal government to meet us halfway on the financial side of that too. So that's stay tuned for that for sure.
That's definitely good news on that front. I'm going to switch it over to a small business grant question. My business, this is coming from Facebook Live. My business applied for the small business grant as soon as it came out back in January, but have not heard anything back. And calling everyone daily, including Doug Ford's office, emailing, looking online, but nothing. Even reached out to your offices to look for written permission to look into this on our behalf, and still haven't heard anything. Nicki's Chicken and Barbecue still sinking. It seems that everyone is letting us down. Who else do we reach out to? I think, and the reason I'm answering this question obviously is because it was asked, but I think it helped a lot of businesses, but there were still some that fell through the gaps. There were ones that started in a particular time frame within it that haven't received any funding. So is the application? I realized it was an automatic if you had already qualified previously, but was there a reapplication? Did they change any of the markers on that to allow for more people to apply on the second round?
Yeah, I can tell you in the first, we processed, approved over 100,000, which is quite a number. If somebody's having trouble, please recontact our office, because we're shepherding a few through still. And each one of the, I know exactly which ones each one of them are. This is very important to me. So whether you're in Andrea's riding or mine, contact one of us, we'll sort it out,
Okay.
whose it is, and then we'll bird dog it and get you an answer. And it's pretty, again, the deadline's tonight. So if somebody hasn't applied, then they really need to. In terms of have the criteria changed? Not a lot, no. It's been pretty consistent. We've tried to target and work around some of the federal programs that are out there as well. We're trying to not overlap. So we have that. They should also be looking at the Canada Emergency Wage Subsidy, the federal wage subsidy. They should be looking at rent subsidy, the federal one. But we can help navigate all of those. So please contact our offices again, please.
Well, good. And it's a fairly quick application. So, I mean, the deadline tonight's not unachievable, but we'll certainly have them reach out to you today, and hopefully can get them an answer. With regards to the tourism grant, I understand that there has been a tourism grant announced, 10,000 to 20,000 for those businesses that didn't qualify for the small business support grant. However, with the new announcement at the Ontario Small Business Grant will be increasing, doubling for those who originally qualified. How is this fair to businesses within the tourism industry that have been impacted more and will end up receiving less government support? Is there a plan to increase the tourism support grant to make this this equal? Doug, or who wants to take that one?
Well, I mean, my notes tell me, quite frankly, and we can dig in more, my notes tell me that they can qualify between 10 and 20. And it is expanded to travel agents and to others affected in the tourism industry. In fact, I've got a short list here, a lot of paper still, although we're trying to be paperless. There's quite a few in the tourism world. Hotels, motels, travel agencies, amusement and water parks, hunting and fishing camps, recreation vacation camps, children's overnight camps. So that this new fund is hitting a new group of people that wouldn't have qualified for the other small business stuff.
Right. Now, I know that they're still continuing to develop things in along that sector, and I think those industry associations are advocating quite strongly as well for additional supports. Todd's wearing a Kempenfest shirt today. Festivals were obviously impacted pretty strongly with that. It was nice to see some support along those lines, but I'm not sure if the economic impact of those has fully been felt yet within the municipalities, especially with service clubs that rely on a lot of those dollars coming in. So I hope that continues to stay on the government's page and they continue to find supports for those types of events.
And just to jump in there, Paul,
Yeah,
on the Kempenfest is the Ontario Resiliency Fund. I know that's something, many organizations, including Kempenfest, had applied for. So the last round was announced. There is a new round of funding. So that's another envelope that anyone that's tourism oriented or festival oriented could apply for. You know, locally, Talk is Free Theater was able to get some funding amongst others. And so that was the last round, but now we've got a new round. And the great thing about this year is we do have additional rounds of that funding. That's unprecedented. Before, you know, it was this finite period of time. If you were a festival, it's either you made it or you didn't make it. And so, you know, that's been retooled thanks to the minister for that file, Lisa McLeod. And so it's also been tweaked so that more people could qualify, because I think year after year it was the same people getting it over and over again, which is, you know, great for those people. But, you know, we've got to stretch that dollar a little bit more through our community.
No, absolutely. I think the criteria was more based on content and less on need. And I think the pivot on that is very welcome, because an event like Coming Fest is, you know, it's literally run by charities and by service clubs. The entity itself really doesn't keep any money. So without that support, you know, it's very difficult for them to restart when this sort of ends at some point.
I'll just touching on that quick. So
yep.
The economic spinoff to our region is over $12 million from Kempenfest. And as Paul said, the stakeholders in Kempenfest are all not-for-profit. So we missed it last year. We're missing it this year. That's a huge hit to our local tourism sector. And it's unfortunate. We're certainly hoping we're going to survive and get through to next year, but a lot of people don't realize the actual impact of such an event to our region. So it's pretty huge.
Yeah. Well, we'll make something work. Any plans to include in the budget supportive housing to end the homelessness crisis? I didn't see anything in there. I think that was more municipal, really.
Yeah, there are some supports. I mean, there's been supports every single budget. This particular one, we have been funneling a lot of funding to the municipal level of government. You know, there's that 1 million for municipalities, and then we topped up another 4 billion. So certainly they're getting a lot of capital and cash flow. But specific to housing, something we mentioned in the budget was 255 million in new provincial funding. And that's basically to provide municipalities and their service managers to provide some social service relief and whatnot. And that includes supportive housing. And that's on top of previously, and in the last budget we introduced, which was about November, there was something called the Social Services Relief Fund. That was about a 510 million of funding through municipalities. So that could go towards different shelters, et cetera. So that was put in there. We also put in over 3 years about 18.5 million in transitional housing programs. I think that's important to acknowledge, because there's people that are coming out of domestic violence or human trafficking, which is a significant issue in our area. And so that, that fund has been put in place as well. And then, if there's other stuff above and beyond that in terms of just clearing the way to build a little more affordable housing.
Yeah, but I think a lot of that stuff takes a long time to come online. So I mean, the support is there. You're just not necessarily seeing it in a tangible way. I mean, Jeff Lehman has said that this is the year of the crane, and that's certainly obvious as you drive around Barrie. But that doesn't solve the immediate need that we're seeing right now. If you're in a position where you're trying to find housing in Barrie, it's scary at the moment. And I was talking with Alan LaFontaine from Aurelia yesterday. Earlier this week, and he was mentioning that in Aurelia it is a huge issue as they have a lot of expansion in terms of manufacturing, those kinds of things. They're really having a hard time filling those positions just because they can't house people. So
yeah, it's difficult because I know because the money's there. It's just I think a lot of the red tape that has to be cleared on different levels of government. I think provincially we tried to do our part, but there's probably different work to be done on different levels of government still too.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'll just jump in and say, like Steve Clark, you hear about the ministerial zoning orders. He's using them for housing related projects as well. Like it's we're trying to clear out red tape at every corner because the need is so great. Yeah, the cost of living in this area for somebody on lower income is quite a challenge.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, Claudia, do you have any comments on that? I mean, I mean, we're talking about Barrie locally, but I mean, what do you see in the province? Are you getting the same kind of feedback?
Yeah, the housing is, I mean, years ago, maybe it wouldn't have been a business issue strictly, but now it's just affecting businesses' ability to access and retain talent. So it's a huge one. And I would echo the comments that red tape seems to be the biggest sticking point. There's a lot of NIMBYism around different regions, and you know, it's not just about funding, it's also about making sure that developers can make those investments where they are needed.
Right, exactly. So Doug, I know you have to leave early, so I'm going to give you an opportunity to do your closing now. We'll try to continue on with some questions past that.
Yeah, I really appreciate it, and unfortunately, I am getting drawn into a cabinet meeting, so I have to do that. But I have to say, you know, I'm really pleased with the dialogue that we've been able to maintain through the chamber with the local businesses. It's very important to us to keep our pulse on where people are, so we can feed in real examples of how the decisions we're making are affecting them, and that's just really, really important. I do want to say that we've done some things. We've given a lot of money, transferred a lot of money to the municipalities. That's allowed the city of Barrie to give a small business grant as well. And so, you know, flow through at all levels. We're trying to work collectively. We're trying to change rules on farmers markets. So now any Ontario spirits, Ontario product, wine, spirits, craft can be sold at Ontario markets. We're trying to come up with innovative ways to keep things local, to support local, and things like patios, although they affect us locally. That's part of my world with the AGCO as AG. So any ideas that people have, everything's on the table. We need to support our local communities. We need to support Ontario. There's an Ontario travel grant that's been proposed. You'll see more about that in the budget. So any and all ideas are welcome. I really appreciate it. And I apologize, I have to run.
Thanks very much for coming today, Doug. We appreciate everything that you do for us, and in the work that we do every day to keep you know, our citizens safe and moving forward. So have a good day, and fight in cabinet. Get us something good. All right. So we got a couple of minutes left here to get on to a couple other questions. A lot of them are similar questions, so I apologize to anyone that's out there that I'm going to avoid answering the same sort of questions on different things. But there's a question here with regards to, you know, any more grants available for female entrepreneurs. There was a small grant available last year, but the window to apply was small. Yesterday we did a webinar with the Métis Nation, the MNO, and they were talking about a lot of the different supports and grants they had out there for obviously their citizens, but also for businesses to tap into that resource, which was amazing. So my comment there, and I'll pass it on to whoever wants to answer, is that there are other additional sources of funding out there other than just what comes from the government, and to keep those in mind, and obviously contact us as we can put you in touch with people. Anyone want to answer that?
I'll just jump in on the digital Main Street program in terms of supporting entrepreneurs. It's supporting all entrepreneurs. So that's a great one to really drill down on. I think there's a lot more opportunity there. I know the city of Barrie through BIA2 has really taken advantage of it, but I would say like that's probably a significant investment on the entrepreneurship front.
Cool. Claudia had your hand up.
Yeah, I love this topic because there are so many fantastic women entrepreneurs there, and they tend to be less well financed. So it is important to have specific programs for them. And the federal government has this huge strategy for women entrepreneurs. If you visit the Women Entrepreneurship Knowledge Hub, wekh.ca, there's a ton of resources there. They can tell you where to access funding, and they provide other types of support advisory services. So it's just, I think, the one-stop shop for women entrepreneurs, as well as the other programs. There's a ton, but they tend to consolidate that information on the website.
Super, that's great. Well, so whoever answered that question, and contact us if you didn't get those acronyms, or and we will be happy to put you in touch either with Claudia or with those programs.
And one program, just to highlight, Paul, it's one to look out for every year. I believe the window may have closed in March, but a really good one every year, pandemic aside, is the Women's Economic Security Program, WESP, and that provides employment training and entrepreneurship training and wraparound supports for women, especially in the low income bracket as well. And then the other program I remember looking into as well is Investing in Women's Futures. The acronym for that is IWF, and that's operated through 23 different centers across the province. So those are good ones to look out for.
Cool, that's great. I always learn something new. There's so many funds and supports out there. And one of the questions is here, where do I go to find a list of grants and funding available for nonprofits to apply for during COVID, something that can be shared. You know, it's one of those things where I don't know if there's any kind of a central database there. There's a couple of pay for ones like in, you know, grants.ca, but if any of you guys can shed some light on where they can go to find more information. The Ontario website's usually, government website's usually pretty good, but that only covers the province, not federal.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the terms of non-for-profits, some of the grants that have been available through the Ontario Petroleum Organization, I would really look to that. Like I said, something we've done is changing the eligibility for it. And so, you know, something you can look towards is if you are marked as a non-for-profit, all of the Ontario Petroleum funding is fair game for you, and you would qualify over anyone else, because if you're for profit, it makes it a bit harder. So certainly look out for that, those types of supports as well.
Okay, that's awesome. There's a question in about providing those links. What we'll do is we'll put those into the information on Facebook Live. After the event, because I don't think we're going to have enough time to get them into the chat for this particular session, and then they're available for everybody else. But just being conscious of everyone's time, we give a couple of minutes for everyone to wrap up, and then we'll do our closing and get everybody on their day. So with that, Andrea, did you have some final parting words?
Yeah, I think the chamber, you guys have been really supportive of just, you know, making sure that I stay grounded. I think, you know, as much as like, you know, businesses, you know, connect with me, but they connect a lot with you. And I just appreciate you just keeping your ear to the ground and being a really good resource for myself so that I can advocate on behalf of you. Something I wanted to highlight, just tomorrow, I do have Minister Peter Bethenbally, our Finance and Treasury Board Minister. He's joining me for a town hall at 6 o'clock. So those who are just tuning in now, who weren't able to go through the Q&A, that want to join tomorrow at 6 o'clock, hear directly from the finance minister, maybe ask him any questions, or if you have suggestions, do let us know. And I always, you know, end with this, but, you know, if you have any other ideas, I know we just went over the budget that we just introduced. It has yet to pass. So we should pass it around the beginning of May. So those who are waiting for their second round of the small business grant, you should count on that rolling out around May-ish, because that's when they'll pass. But, you know, if you have any ideas in terms of if there's a process that you have to do for your business and it's, you know, it's interacting with the provincial government, it causes you headaches, there's too much paperwork or something, you know, working with the chamber, we've been able to clear so much of that, but there's other ideas, let me know. I was talking to a long-term care doctor, you know, a few months ago, and he made a really good suggestion of something we could really do to help long-term care. So that was great. And that idea is actually flowing through already. We don't have to wait for a budget for that idea to flow through. It's being initiated. So, you know, just because we're talking about budget now, throughout the whole year, we're always collecting ideas. And then when it comes to, you know, regulation reduction, or, you know, we like to say red tape, we always have 2 bills every year. We introduce one in the fall, one in the spring. So we're always gearing up ideas for that too. So do reach out. But I want to thank everyone for staying strong with us here and being very patient. It's been a bumpy ride for sure, but we're doing everything we can to help support you.
Wonderful. Thanks, Andrea. And Claudia, a couple of final parting words from you.
Yeah, thank you so much for having us. I just want to kind of repeat that this is one budget and it's one piece of the puzzle, but there's more to come and the situation is still evolving. So I guess my plea to everyone listening is, if you have feedback, to engage through your chamber or directly with the government. The chamber is a good resource, and tell us what you like as well, because I think sometimes we hear a lot about what the gaps are, but it helps us to know what's working well so we can encourage more of that. And you know, I'm biased, but I do want to repeat that the chambers have really worked hard, and Paul and Todd here and all their staff are great resources for you. So I encourage everyone to reach out if you have any kind of concern or positive feedback as well.
Wonderful, thank you. And we just put a note in there about the She Recovery or She Recovery report that is on the Ontario Chamber website. Another great resource for women, and you should have a look at it. I'm going to go off to Todd for some final comments from the chamber, and then we'll wrap it up.
Okay, thanks, Paul. Thank you, Claudia, Andrea, and of course, Doug. It's always informative. You guys bring a lot of information forward. You're there working for us day and night. Certainly everybody in our community, the business community, everything appreciates it. Just one quick point here that I'm sure Paul will touch on his closing remarks, but shop local, buy local, support your local community. You know, Mother's Day is coming up, Father's Day is a little further down the road, birthdays, whatever. Get out and support the local businesses right now, buy gift cards, do whatever you can to help keep them afloat. You know, we've got another month of this ahead of us. And then, you know, hopefully with any luck at all, at that point, it'll be in behind us a little bit, but do whatever you can to support local. All the local people are here. They're here for you. They're here for the sports teams. They all give back. Make sure you support them in their time of need. Back to you, Paul.
Thanks very much, Todd. And again, thank you everybody for coming today. You know, in closing, a couple of things to sort of comment on. You know, the chambers work, you know, under the umbrella of the OCC with lots of great guidance that comes from them. And we're constantly pushing that information out. But chambers also work independently amongst themselves to develop policy, to develop different things. One of those things would be our you know, reform request for the lockdown situation. And there was a letter that we put out recently along with another 7 or 8 other chambers. You know, that stuff then becomes a policy resolution request that goes to our AGM, is discussed, developed, and then eventually it is something that becomes a report that's then put to government. So that kind of advocacy really makes a big difference in the long run. And, you know, it's important that you understand that and you contribute and give us information to help us frame out those kinds of reforms or those resolutions so we can do more for them. In Barrie as well, we have co-authored a document on low carbon footprint building as well, which is again another key thing with the expansion into Innisfil. You know, support for home builders and making sure we're cleaning, building, you know, cleanly is important, but also affordably. So there's lots of stuff going on behind the scenes other than what's right in front of you every day. But what is in front of you every day are things like our Barrie Takeout Challenge. You know, we've got another couple of weeks left of it. So far, we have over 80 restaurants sponsored by Paul Southland Motors. With a final, they're, you know, giving us the funding to do 2 $100 prizes each week. In many cases, restaurants are giving us additional cards, so we're able to do up to 6 prizes. And it's basically just for sharing pictures of your takeout. It doesn't cost the chamber anything, doesn't cost the restaurant. It just helps to support local. And then Cool FM was gracious enough to give us $1,000. That'll be drawn for sometime week of April 19th. And then we're looking at, you know, other ways to support retail in some of those hardest hit industries. So stay tuned for some additional programming along that line. Upcoming today at noon, you never know, Todd might actually have time to come today, is our Chamber Chat networking, which is always fun and interactive. And then we have Effective Communication in the Workplace webinar on April 13th at 1 p.m. But with that, we're 7 minutes over. I apologize for stealing time from people, but thank you very much. Have a safe day, and get vaccinated if you have the opportunity. That's the only way out of this. Vaccinations, vaccinations, vaccinations. Yeah, they may not be available, but they will be. Sign up, you know, suffer through the lines, but get the needle in the arm, and that's how we recover. Have a great afternoon. Thanks a lot.
Paul.
Thank you.
Cheers.